First Samuel 19. Everybody tends to love a love story, a Valentine story, something where love is built up, and at the end, the two individuals, whether it be through friendship or through lovers, that they come together and then a happily ever after at the end. I think even personally myself, though I have not seen Lord of the Rings or read the books, I do know of the genuine love that is between Frodo and Sam as they continue on in their journeys. And everyone loves that. They love the fact that one person is able to stick beside another individual all the way to the end. And our story here, as we pick up in 1 Samuel 19, we have the love story of everybody. And it's everybody loves David. And everybody is in favor of him, except this one individual that by king matters, and by kingship matters and things, especially in the story of David, on the throne to come, because he has been already anointed. There's this Saul guy. We are all familiar with him thus far, and it's Saul's love or lack of it that is really intriguing as we go through 1 Samuel, even recently from chapter 15, in his disobedience onward. We have David's going to be king. So we have that set up. We have Saul already king. And it's really, really awkward, per se, to have someone anointed as king, but have another king already on the throne. It presents a lot of issues, especially in Saul's mind. You have Saul's children. Jonathan loves David as his own, makes a covenant with him later on. He is like a pact. He's set. He's tied up in knot with him. So David and Jonathan are good friends, and Saul's the dad of Jonathan. So you can kind of get some familial things there, a family relationship that's tension in the home. Now, on top of that, Saul tried to pawn off, you could say, his daughter, or rightfully so, in the Philistine battle, and David ends up getting the daughter, Michal. And so we have a daughter and son that are for David and everyone else in the kingdom except Saul. So that's kind of our background as we walk right back into 1 Samuel 19. And our story will be very extremely similar in that way. It's Saul again. Saul struggling with David. And it's David once again seeing that God, and here's the point that we're really going to be emphasizing today, is God is protector. The title of today's is Escaping Danger by God's Protection. We need to trust God. We need to trust God that He's capable of intervening to protect His own. We kind of a little bit talked about that even this morning in the first example that I gave as the introduction. But here we're going to see constantly just this idea that God Himself is protector, and why we need to even some question through trials and difficulties. Sometimes we wonder, how can these difficulties happen, right? There's family functions that go wrong. There's cut hours at work. There's things like, there's even budget cuts or breakdowns on vehicles. And you wonder, okay, in these trials, why is it easier sometimes to obey God in them than to trust Him? We have a God that, this is like we pushed this morning from the obedience to God, and we can often obey God, but still not trust that He is capable of protecting us. That time and time again aspect. Yes, our faith is small, but it's often because our view of God is small. And when we have a big view of God, that's why we're looking at God as protector here. When our God is bigger, our faith just becomes that much more. So we brought in the context we have Saul just trying to eliminate David at all costs, In 18, Jonathan has cut a covenant, the first one, and he'll do it again in 20. Saul looks at David with all his suspicion because he comes back into town and all the ladies are singing about him. Saul, he's got his thousands, but David is 10,000. It's the extra more. David's really, really cool. He saved us from the Philistines. And then there's this Goliath guy, and they're just recalling it. It's like country time songs for the people in the area. And it strikes a note in Saul's heart in the wrong way. He's like, this is not it. And we'll see, actually, this is the neater part in 20, and I don't want to reveal it because it is the big point that even David and Jonathan are struggling with. That David asks himself and Jonathan, why is it that your father just wants to kill me? What's up with that? But I think we're picking up on the way. He has some suspicion. He's got envy, jealousy. Why is that this guy, David, younger than me, possibly better looking than me? Because it even emphasizes that David was young and ready, and while Saul was also that, but tall, maybe he's wondering that too. Like, people might be catching on to his looks, But maybe he's catching on to the fact that David has a better heart than him. He knows the kingdom needs to be run with wisdom, I'm sure, maybe. At this point, we're maybe doubting that with all of his decisions. So that's Saul, the bad guy, the enemy in the story, the protagonist, or the antagonist, sorry. And then you look at this in verse 1. Now let's read here. Saul spoke with Jonathan his son and all his servants to put David to death. So Saul's got some homicidal efforts here, right? He's trying to get other people on his side. And that often happens with people of anger, people of bitterness and wickedness. They try to just get other people on their side. Because one is just not enough to cause the ruckus that he wants. So he's like, okay, if I can't do this myself, then I'm going to recruit some people. And basically, it's honestly, if I was taught this in this way as a kid, I would have loved this story. But he's trying to basically create a secret mission of assassins trying to delete David from the kingdom. That's pretty cool. But also at the same time, it's kind of disgusting to see that a man is now going to be driven from this point onward trying to get rid of David. Like, I'm done with David. He is so convinced. He's convinced of his anger. He's convinced of his hatred that it's right. He's excused himself because of that. Of an individual that probably, maybe if you sat him down and you said, wait, you were anointed by the people who chose you from the decision of God, and you're making these decisions. And even Jonathan will point that out. He literally sits Saul down and says, hold up, you're saying this, this, and this doesn't quite make sense. Because he's done nothing wrong, and he has given you so much benefit. Why are you doing this? But he's convinced. He's like, we gotta kill David. Get him out of here. We're done with him. And I'd like to challenge you to, even when we look at Saul's life, when we look at what he does, oftentimes our anger can get us there too. When we're full of anger, when we camp out on it, it's not hard to see the end is hatred, the end is murder, as Jesus points out in Matthew chapter 5. But also, we want to get people on our side. When we're angry, we want other people to like us, to be on our side, so that when our cause that we see as unjust from our point of view, that we're angry and bitter at, someone else will also come by and say, yes, this guy is right. We should be unjust. Like, this is unjust and this is not right, and we should be angry at it. When you get a mob, you get mob mentality. In a sense, there's a part of unity within anger. But who doesn't buy in on this? Actually, a lot of people here. And this is going to be an overall view of who God is. But your first individual who doesn't buy in on it is Jonathan. But Jonathan, verse 1b, Saul's own son, I like how they point that out, greatly delighted in David. So this is just a recap in 1 through 3, just trying to get the setting set up here, getting your background going. And verse 2 says, Jonathan told David, saying, Saul, my father, is seeking to put you to death. So now, please be careful in the morning and stay in a secret place and hide yourself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field, where you are, and I will speak with my father about you. What I perceive, I will tell you. The first aspect here of when we have to trust in God. So we know God intervenes to protect us, but the aspect of looking at this and saying, okay, how are we like Jonathan, David, Michael, and those who did trust God for the intervening protection? To see God is going to work in this. What is going to happen is Jonathan himself is willing to pay the cost of being loyal and being upright. He's willing to go an extra mile. He's willing to stick with something that's right and that's true, even when his own family members are against him. So he basically goes to David and says, you know what, David, I've actually been recruited, so keep this hush. But my father is trying to get rid of you, okay? So he's been talking to me back at home. He's been trying to get me to get you out of here. But I'm telling you, David, I love you. So be wise. Be careful. This is going to happen immediately. I need you to hide. You know, you just hide. You just be careful and you wait. You need to be patient as well. Because I'm going to talk to Dad. I'm going to try to just to talk him through some of these things and try to reason with him in a sense. I'm going to see what he's really all about. You know, he says in verse 3, what I perceive. You know, what I see, I will tell you. All right, so that's the close on your first scene, right? You have this background of Jonathan talking to his dad, getting things set up. Now you're into your first picture scene, apparently in a field. Right? He says, in the field we're going to do this. So verse 4, you get ready, we're in the field, and Jonathan's speaking now. And he speaks well of David. And it says this in the Bible, 1 Samuel 19:4, then Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, do not let the king sin against his servant David, since he has not sinned against you, and since his works have been very good for you. For he took his life in his hands and struck the Philistine, and the Lord brought about a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it, and were glad. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by putting David to death without a cause? He's basically telling them, hey, Dad, don't you remember? Don't you have a context of anything that happened previously? Why are you so bitter? Don't you see that God is with David clearly? But not only that, but David is just helping your kingdom in all benefits. Like, he has done so much for you. And not only that, but do you remember how you were joyful? You have let, it's almost like he's pointing out, he's like, you've let, and this is something crazy you would never hear today for a son to talk to his father like this. But he's saying, Dad, your anger has just gotten just to the point where you're illogical. You're not even thinking. Shouldn't Shouldn't we celebrate David instead of murdering him? Just notice that too. That Jonathan really comes to David, or to Saul, and he's just looking at this, and he's just trying to do two things. He's trying to have the agreeable truths. Like, okay, this is what's true. When you're talking to an enemy, when you're talking to someone who is very antagonistic, Jonathan's method here is very beneficial to learn. You go to what is both agreed upon, first of all, and the praises. Don't speak bad. Don't speak bad about someone when someone else wants. Don't be the mirror. Someone wants anger, someone wants death. Be a Jonathan and stop. When it comes to you, and maybe there's different sins and aspects that someone wants to have you in on to participate, stop it. And reorient the conversation. That's what Jonathan does. He sweetly entreats him and says, Saul, look at it. Morally and logically, he's good to the kingdom, and not only that, but he is a good man. He's innocent blood. And you're doing this without cause. Verse 5, at the end of it, it's like, why would you do it? Don't you still have a moral compass? Let's reply in verse 6. And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan, and Saul swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. Wow. And then look at verse 7. Then Jonathan called David, and Jonathan told him all these words, and Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in the presence as formerly. This is what we call, in the show business, a false ending, where something seems like it's all good now. That was a really quick resolve. Jonathan did exactly what he was supposed to do. He heard Saul out, and he says, hey, what's going on here? And then it seems here Saul is very making covenants. He's swearing on an oath. He's like, Lord, as the Lord lives, he will not be put to death. Okay, then that's literally why you're angry, is you want David dead, clearly, so this is all resolved. At this point, if we ended at verse 7, it's happily ever after, really. And David went back to the court of Saul and started playing his instrument as days before, like he was, and there was never unrest ever again. And then you open up to the next scene in verse 8. And this is why we understand Saul's jealousy. Because it's always after the Philistines. It's always after David's victory. It's always after David does something right and well. As Saul sings it, I'm sure the songs now come back again as he comes back from war. So it says in verse 8, there was war again. And David went out and fought with the Philistines and struck them with a great slaughter, so that they fled before him. Now, there was an evil spirit from the Lord on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand. Before we go on there, let's finish out this first section of Jonathan. How is Jonathan trusting in God? And I think the first aspect there is truth. Your real friends are loyal. They know what is right. And he agrees with God in a sense, in trusting the Lord. But also, there's a physical aspect to it. Jonathan has wisdom. He's like, not just because, God's going to put you on the throne, we know that, so no matter what happens, you can do whatever. No, there's still some wisdom. You need to hide yourself. All right? That's going to happen throughout the whole text. There's still physical things that you need to do. Still things that you need to recognize that are wise in the situation that you're given. Not just blindly trusting God in the sense of giving up all of your trust to him as if there's no wisdom in making any decisions. That's not it. But Jonathan understands that. But also recognize that final point there, that believers are not exempt from danger. This is going to happen. And sure, we peruse through the book of Acts and even throughout the epistles that Paul points out himself as the object of danger. Like, I've received it. I've received beatings and pains and stonings. He understands that just because, even with David's aspect, just because he's God's anointed doesn't mean that he's safe from all harm. God still has a purpose here. But even within God's purpose, that's what we're pointing at. Like, God's protection is still always there. The second thing we're going to look at tonight, when we're trusting in God's intervening protection, like we stated, it still means using safety measures for physical dangers. You have different things out there. Sorry, I'll get everything here. You have different things out here like harnesses, gloves, goggles, hard hats. I think sometimes we have individuals who look at those things and says, "Well, that's stupid. God will control as He controls, and if a rock falls on my head, then so be it. I don't need to put on these safety equipment. He's protected me before." We need to have a healthy dose of knowledge of what's going on. Maybe David wasn't right in going back and playing a harp for a man with a spear in his hand. Maybe that wasn't too smart. But from his perspective, everything was all good. Saul has repented in a sense, or at least not repented, but maybe acknowledged that he's not going to kill David. So everything was fine for a little bit. But the problem here is Saul's sin is envy. And that problem was really never addressed. And it was never solved. The mouth had made a commitment to something his heart had not turned to. It's like, oh, yeah. You'll be fine. But let's look at the next portion of the text here. Like we said, there was war. Let's hop back into verse 9. Now there was an evil spirit from the Lord on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand. And David was playing the harp with his hand. And Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear. But he slipped away out of Saul's presence. So that Saul stuck the spear into the wall. And David fled and escaped that night. That's not an action worthy of note right there. That is the opposite of what we would have expected here. All right, he pinned him and drove him away. This is wartime. This is battle. That's really interesting, isn't it? We even have it in our context up top. That the irony is that David struck the enemy Philistines dead, and that's exactly what Saul is trying to do to David, is strike him dead. Saul is saying that David's just like a Philistine. They're trying to kill him. Trying to get rid of him like he's a mouse inside the home or something. Get rid of it. And that's the thing about this man's anger, is it easily moves. Like we saw that Jesus points that out in Matthew chapter 5, that hatred is murder. And it easily just moves right into it. And now it's just going to come time and time again. Like, well, let's just get rid of the guy. He's now going to be drove to insanity to get rid of David. So, what's the next scene? So we were in the field, that went well, it seemed. And then it kind of took a quick turn to the court issues with the spear in the wall, which I think is super cool, how he throws it right when he leaves, hits the wall. He leaves out, and now we have another scene in 11 through 17. So he goes into the night, goes home, he's in his house, and then it says this in verse 11. Then Saul sent messengers to David's house to keep watch over him in order to put him to death in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, "If you do not make an escape for your life tonight, tomorrow you will be put to death. You are toast." So here's the safety plan. Here's what he does. Here's what she does. So Michal let David down through the window, and he went out and fled and escaped. And then Michal took the household idol and laid it on the bed and put a quilt of goat's hair at its head and covered it with pillows. So perhaps Michal heard. Right? Perhaps she's knowledgeable, knowing what her dad's still up to, what he's doing. And kind of like Rahab here. You know, she's still letting him down throughout the night, at the end, outside the window. So let's look at 15. So you can even imagine maybe that Michal comes to the door and the guys, they come up. "Hey, we're looking for Michal, David. Bring him out to me." And Michal comes to the door, maybe in like a modern sense with a thermometer, like, "Woo, man, 103. Are you serious? Are you seeing this? He is sick, like extremely sick. You can't see him right now. Whatever you're wanting from him, I can't imagine what you want for David at 11 o'clock at night. We can't. He's in bed right now. He's extremely sick." And so in verse 15 it says, "So Saul sent messengers to see David, saying," here's that, hold up, aspect of 14 is he sent messengers and he sent them again. So they actually went back to Saul saying, "Oh, sorry, we can't assassinate David, he's sick." That's a bummer. And they buy it, which is hilarious. So he sends them back to see David, saying, "No, bring him up to me on his bed." He says, "I don't care if he's sick. Bring him on his bed. Well, I'm going to put him to death." And the messengers came, and behold, they go and they look at the bed. And here's what it says in verse 16. The household idol was on the bed with the quilt of goat's hair at its head. Okay. So Saul comes to Michal. "Why have you deceived me like this and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped?" And Michal said to Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I put you to death?'" So she lies again, saying, "Saul, your son-in-law was threatening me. He was saying, you gotta let me go, or else I'm going to put you to death." Man, that brute. Isn't that a horrible son-in-law? And so, now what? Now what afterwards? He's going to go and do things all on his own. But let's stop here. And let's look at this. God gave us common sense. Okay? There's good reason here. There's an aspect of this wife knows, hey, this is not going to turn out for our good. He's chasing you, just leave. Just leave the premises. Get out of here. But also as a reminder, we can't allow the means in which help comes to undermine God as the source of our help. It doesn't justify lying. God still will do, no matter what we do. His plan is protected. A lot of times we think the actions I do are going to change God's plan, change God's idea. That's not the case. We need to stick to what is morally true throughout the entire process. Trusting in God means that you know God as your strength and defense. We can trust God as our strength. Let's turn to Psalm 59. Do you indeed speak righteousness, O gods? Do you judge with equity, O sons of men? No. In heart you work unrighteousness. On earth you prepare a path for the violence of your hand. In verse 6, he's calling out to you, O God, shatter their teeth in your mouth. Break out the fangs of the lions, O Lord. He wants them gone. And in 10 and 11, verse 10 and 11, the righteous will be glad when he beholds the vengeance. He will wash his feet in the blood of the wicked, and men will say, surely there is a reward for the righteous. Surely there is a God who judges on earth. When these dangers threaten you, realize that God is the righteous judge. It's exactly the point of worship we even had this morning. Go up, praying, waiting, trusting. Go up, singing to God as your sure defense. Now we have this final scene. We've tried a lot of different ways to get rid of David, and they've all been squandered because of God's protection. And here's the neat aspect. A trust in God and his protection has a rest aspect to it. Let's finish out. 18, verse 18 of 1 Samuel 19. Now David fled and escaped and came to Samuel at Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and stayed in Naioth. And it was told to Saul, saying, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. Then Saul sent messengers to take David, but they saw the company of the prophets prophesy, with Samuel standing and presiding over them. And the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. This was told to Saul, and he sent other messengers, and they also prophesied. So Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they also prophesied. And he himself went to Ramah, and came as far as the large well, that is in Seku. And he asked and said, where are Samuel and David? And someone said, behold, they are at Naioth and Ramah. So he went there to Naioth and Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also, so that he went along prophesying continually until he came to Naioth and Ramah. He also stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel, and lay down naked all the day and all the night. Therefore, they say, is Saul also among the prophets? God can change an intensely angry man into a very much crazy man here. Trusting in God's, his protection, we can rest now in his means, his methods. Who would have thought of that? Like, okay, he's in a spot where David is now with Samuel, and he's sending out people, and time again, the Spirit of God just changes them. That's God's way of protecting. Then you had Jonathan. He was a logically minded individual. Michael, maybe more cunning than she probably should have been. But then you have God's method, who is in control of the very heart to protect us. It always ultimately comes down to how God handles things. 3 times, and then Saul's like, fine. Never send someone to do the work of a man, I'll just do it myself. Just imagine the pride in that too. It's like, okay, they can't do it, and I've sent all the best of my messengers to get rid of these guys and to bring them to me. fine, I'll get out of my own throne and out of my kingly duties and do this myself. And he probably thinks he's not going to be like that because he's heard of this. But now they're just joining. You know, it seems like the rest of the guys are like, look, yeah, beat them, join them. Well, that wasn't the case, but God did still change their heart. But Saul goes, and God is reminding, even through the middle of the first Samuel here, he's still in control of the heart. Praise the Lord. That even at the point when it seems that there's weakness and that things could only get worse, God reminds us through this passage even that he is still in control of the heart. That not even the angriest of man, people who are driving themselves crazy to do their will, does not mean God is less in control. Knowing God humbles kings, and that he humbles militaries and messengers at his will, I can rest in that and say, yeah, he will take care of me. There's one question that I want to think about along with these last two, just to leave with you. Do you really believe that do you think that you are invincible until God says otherwise? In the scriptures, even in Psalm 90, he has counted our days. He knows our days in many other places. Even Job recognizes that. Do we realize that our time is not up on earth until God has allowed it and declared it? Seems pretty miraculous here that David has been alive time and time again. Bless God. Because God has a purpose for David, and as we, the readers, have a large portion to see all of these things. But if David's sitting there and he's wondering that, and you're asking him, like, David, do you ever realize that you're alive now and today, missing the spear, missing just the men, missing the messengers that came after you? It wasn't just of good luck. It was a providential God behind it all, protecting you. Knows your days, knows your last breath, the day, the time, the month, and the year. And you are alive for God's purpose in this plan. You recognize that luck had never to do with anything. It was God's protection. Amazing religious experiences that don't change your character and Christ-likeness, they don't mean anything. Don't be a Saul. Don't give the words to not change the heart. Saul's experience had little or nothing to do with him, or even for him. So that is a passage that we can recall to mind, that we can bring the story back and say, I know God will protect me this week too. And that, yes, although my days are numbered, my days that I'm alive here on earth are still and always are for God's purpose. God is a great protector. He's got amazing ways to do that. And yes, we should still be wise and discerning, but ultimately, and always was, even through our wisdom and discernment, God is sovereign. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this passage and our study through it. Thank you for being a sovereign God. What a holy, righteous attribute that you are. Sovereign, just in control. Not only that, but protector of the righteous. We know our protection, Father, that you have granted me and those who have trusted in you, salvation, ultimate protection. And we thank you for that. You have a plan and purpose for us. It's greater than any shield or bomb shelter that man has created. it's the direction